Hey everyone, Juan here. Welcome to SQL Lingua Franca, the podcast about analytics that reveals what the documentation does not cover.
SQL Lingua Franca. Mayo.
Today we have Jovan, a former colleague of mine and also a co-author of the book Fundamentals of Analytics Engineering. He brought us today a deep dive on how to properly deploy DBT. Jovan, before we get started, I want to hear about you as a person outside of your data career.
Sure. Well, thanks, Juan, for having me. It's a pleasure. I'm an analytics engineer by profession. Outside of my work, I'm very interested in anything that has to do with fitness, body and mind, and generally, I'm a very active person. I like going on ski trips. Not so fond of beach holidays as really like going for a hike or doing some physical activity during my breaks. I'm very much into calisthenics, so I like to work out as much as I can. And I also go to the gym. And since I've moved to Austria, I've noticed really kind of a dramatic shift a positive shift in my energy level. So I guess it has to do with, I guess, the better weather or climate in Austria. I'm not sure, but I feel much better. So it's kind of
The mountains.
it is, yeah. And maybe it's the fresh air, or just the change of environment. I think it did me well. Apart from that, I like history. I like reading history book, listening to podcasts. I like politics as well. So yeah, I'm really have a kind of a broad field of interest, to put it that way. And I guess also it kind of also underlines my work as an analytics engineer. At the fundamental level, I'm really a person who enjoys statistics, who enjoys like trivial facts, who likes to get into the nit and grit and the details of things. So that's kind of how I would describe myself.
Well, I think you already made a little bit of the bridge with your diverse interest, including data science and also you moving to Austria.
Yeah,
So maybe let's talk about it. Tell me about you professionally.
sure. So I started off as a data scientist actually, and back then I wasn't sure if I should call myself like that or as a data analyst. At that period in time, I started off as an intern at the big telecom company in Amsterdam. So this was 6 years ago, and I was very happy to kind of apply my knowledge that I had learned during my master's. I studied at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam. I studied business information management. And during my master's, I kind of, in a way, rediscovered myself because previously I had studied business actually. So I studied business administration. And I really, also during the studies, I really felt like, okay, I want more exposure to math, statistics, and finance because I really enjoyed these subjects, especially corporate finance. So I was like, okay, I want to move into finance. But also I kind of had this also exposure to my dad who was telling me, like he actually works as a data architect. So I wanted to kind of combine that because I really noticed that was kind of my strength. I'm much more a person who believes in putting theory into practice rather than talking about it. So I'm really like
Hands-on.
a hands-on person, and I guess, yeah, this kind of this passion got invigorated when I started working at the telecom company, trying to predict churn using machine learning techniques. So it was quite fun to do. And then at some point, I was like, what should I do next? Should I move into business, into consultancy? Because I mean, that was still my strength as a very talkative person, but also knowing how to translate these sort of business requirements into kind of a more technical level, right? That you can actually work with it. And I was interested maybe to work for a company like Accenture or Capgemini, but there was still something bugging me deep inside me, telling me, okay, maybe you should actually just kind of again focus on your strength and follow your passion. And I guess that's how I kind of ended up working in data actually. So it was this first exposure to machine learning, which happened during my master's studies. And then I kind of slowly moved into a data engineering role, actually, because I quickly realized, okay, to actually effectively do machine learning and data science, you need a good fundamental infrastructure and
For sure.
good data pipelines, right? So that was kind of my journey into becoming an analytics engineer. And actually, when I joined Xebia, this was in the summer of 2021, I got super excited when I heard about analytics engineer. So I was, you were actually there, I remember.
Yes,
during the
I
interview.
actually interview you.
Yeah, and it was really a funny moment for me because I realized that we have a lot of things in common. We have this really deep interest into analytics. Maybe not even that much into engineering, as for me it was really into analytics. But then, like, I wanted to move into engineering. That was kind of at least the case for me. And it got me super excited, the first few clients, you know, because it was actually like I felt like, okay, this is what I like to do, you know, really be hands-on and really make a difference at the end of the day. So
Yeah, it's very common to start any data job as an analyst and then maybe flirt with the idea of becoming a data scientist until you finally found like the more permanent thing. That's a pattern that I hear a lot. And being really honest, I think I also fit into that a little bit.
Exactly. And I mean, I've made really huge jumps in my career at Xebia. I've really developed a lot in a short amount of time, just by being exposed so much that I really and I really felt like, okay, this is cool. And I guess when you just understand that that's your passion, at some point things move very quickly, and you just really when you're completely kind of obsessed with these ideas, these paradigms, and especially like the techniques, you know, being able to implement it yourself and see the impact at the client. I guess that was also the reason why I wanted to move into consultancy instead of working at a company, because 2 years prior I worked for a large investment bank in Luxembourg. It was actually, they're a fund administrator and they also provide custody services. But for me, I felt like even though I had a big impact introducing all of these techniques, like working with Alteryx to build our ETL pipelines and building up the whole infrastructure and Tableau basically for our dashboarding, I felt like it was still too slow moving for me, and I really wanted to like change companies quickly and have impact and also gain experience through, you know, being in a more dynamic environment than instead of being inside of a single company, because quickly things can get very complacent and it can kind of be a burden on your personal development and your career development. So that was for me kind of an eye-opener when I joined Xebia.
It's true. When you work as a consultant and you change environment so much, you kind of get accustomed to this crazy rhythm of learning new tools in new environments, and that really gives you a perspective of what you want as a professional. As in, I like working in these environments. I like working with these technologies. I like assignments that have these challenges, but not these other ones.
Exactly. Yep.
So I see that all of that reflected in what you just mentioned.
Yep.
Okay, Jovan, today you brought us an interesting deep dive.
Sure.
Would you like to introduce the topic?
Yes, for sure. So I'm going to talk about productionizing DBT. And DBT, data build tool, is a tool that we use to transform data in a data warehouse. When I joined Xebia in 2021, it was really this cool new thing. Everyone's talking about it in the data analytics space. And I felt like it's such a easy tool to get working with. Prior to that, I also worked for a different company in Amsterdam, and I remember just kind of having to debug store procedures. It was just it's really awful, an awful thing to do. And that kind of
Fun memories.
yeah, it kind of got me less excited to work as a data engineer. But then when I discovered DBT, I was like, okay, this makes it a lot more fun to do, and it's also this really easy tool to get started with and provide real impact for a company. It's open source. I've worked on a bit of like macros and stuff and trying to make it work for me. Also, just by implementing a different clients, I got to see like I guess the flexibility and versatility of working with DBT. So and it's a good thing that now at my new employer, Bitpanda, which is a crypto broker from Austria, we are also embracing DBT and this analytics engineering concept. So it's cool to see. It's cool to see that I actually took all this knowledge and experience and kind of convinced my new employer to get started with it. So that's cool. Yeah.
Yes, I think jumping into something that what you're gonna say is, I personally really enjoy working with DBT. What you mentioned, it takes a lot of the pain points of working in traditional SQL teams,
Yep.
and it makes it a bit more pleasant. Now, I'm not saying that they're the perfect tool or anything, but anybody that has suffered working in SQL environments with large teams that don't have any version control, that
Yep.
write like stored procedures that are 2,000 lines of code, can really appreciate some of the things that this tool brings. However, even though it's very easy to get started in DBT and get the basics done and doing a migration of your code, there are quite a lot of things for which we, as of today, don't have very direct guidelines from, let's say, DBT themselves on how to do, which is a lot of these little deployment questions. Things that come into mind are containerizing, orchestrating, how to test these things properly, because DBT has a lot of ways of testing, but you have to know more or less what you're doing. So I'm very excited because I know you have quite a bit of experience with DBT and like properly productionizing it. And really curious to see what are some of the tips, the pain points, and some of the revelations that anybody listening can take to their own DBT deployment or whatever SQL thing you're doing.
So sure. I mean, I remember just being the first person kind of to introduce DBT, really implementing it actually at some clients that I've worked at during my tenure at Xebia Data. And also currently, I notice implementing it at my current employer. Of course, there's always this challenge of like how to move away from this current paradigm of maintaining these stored procedures and then like all of a sudden switching to DBT because it's a whole different way of looking at things. And DBT for me really is a tool that bridges software engineering and I guess data engineering. With like data engineering is becoming more and more akin to software engineering because traditionally speaking, I think software engineering already had some kind of good best practices in place for testing, building, and shipping code, right? There's this whole practice called DevOps, right? This whole paradigm. So, and now we have data ops because we have actually seen like the whole paradigm of big data, right? We had to kind of scale up with our data infrastructure because of new demands being placed on analytics at scale and real-time analytics, right? So just the amount of data has exploded across the last decade, right? And in order to kind of build data science projects and iterate, you definitely need good infrastructure. That's clear as day. And I think the fundamental issue with that was that a lot of companies are still kind of stuck with old batch processes, old ETL pipelines written in stored procedures that are just difficult to maintain, and we end up spending more time maintaining it rather than building new stuff, right? And that's, I think, where DBT comes in, is to solve this challenge of being stuck with these store procedures and not being scalable and fast moving as you'd like to be as a company. And like really implementing DBT at companies, you see that because of like you mentioned, the flexibility of the tool, it can be still challenging, right? To come up with a good way of working, especially because DBT itself, it's an open source tool. They do provide some guidelines and best practices, but because it's being presented as this like one tool, right? One tool that you need to do your ETL work. It may not apply in every situation, right? It's mostly like a use for batch transformation for batch
Oh,
architectures.
correct. Like batch versus
Exactly.
real-time analytics.
Although nowadays we see like recently I looked at an article from Getting Data, right? The Polish consultancy that Xibia partnered with last year, and they worked on an adapter for DBT to work with Apache Flink, and to basically work with streaming data, which is super interesting. Also something that I was looking at now that I moved to Bitpanda, crypto broker, because we have really low latency requirements.
Yes.
But at the same time, we want to kind of scale up our data teams. So it's a similar situation as when I worked for Enzazada, which is a C production company. The goal there was also to move more towards distributed architecture, where we had these business teams that we wanted to empower to work with data themselves, because ultimately they're the subject matter experts, and you want to kind of enable them to write their own data pipelines, to do their own analytics. And here we face a similar challenge. So it's interesting that across across different industries, you seem to be faced with the same challenges, and I feel like deploying DBT in itself may not even be as hard as people think, because I think if you focus on some of the core principles and fundamentals of how DBT is supposed to work, or how you're supposed to work with DBT, I think that's what you should focus more on, is how to be effective in communicating the purpose of DBT. Because if you're not doing this correctly, you kind of end up with the same thing that you had before, which is SOAR procedures that that may not have may not have proper visibility or lineage, right, of your data pipelines. And I think that's that is I guess like a culprit of this, basically.
What do you mean exactly by communicating the purpose of DBT?
It's very important that people understand that it's more software engineering than traditional data engineering, writing batch jobs, store procedures in your data warehouse. It's first of all, it's a platform agnostic tool, which in itself means it's more kind of you have to make it work for your platform, right? So there's different adapters available, but it's not, there's no like sort of vendor lock-in. It doesn't push you towards using a certain solution.
Yes.
And I guess a decade ago you had this vendor lock-in where if you work with the Microsoft stack, you use Azure, you use Power BI and all of and this sort of thing. I think the trend nowadays is more to have more agnostic infrastructures where theoretically you could move, especially now with Terraform, right, infrastructure as code, you could theoretically move to any other platform. So DBT also in itself is an agnostic tool, which is really useful, meaning that they have taken it upon themselves to build these adapters, to make them to just write basically the SQL that you're used to for your data warehouse, but it's very kind of transferable to other platforms. Another thing is, so I mentioned it's more like, it introduces software engineering principles to data engineering. So we talk about testing your code, testing the data integrity, the referential integrity, right, between tables. It's mostly used for like relational data modeling, dimensional modeling, but you can also use it for like these new paradigms like activity schema. Like it's very flexible, but it's about providing proper lineage to your data, which is really the let's say, I guess, one of the most important business requirements, right? To kind of finally get this whole lineage end to end, basically, of your data platform.
It's crazy how in the past we would write SQL scripts that would like all run with no external dependencies just because orchestrating things in a smart way was so difficult. And that's how we ended up with very, very large scripts. But now that DBT handles the orchestration, well, at least the DBT parses
Yep.
the dependencies between tables and is able to break them down and know when exactly to run them. That simplifies the line of work a lot.
Exactly, and we should not forget that orchestration, and it was actually done on the platform itself, on the data warehouse itself, with the stored procedures, right? And now we have Airflow, we have even new tools like Mage.ai, we have Dexter, right? So and DBT really integrates well with these tools. It's amazing how quickly actually these tools integrate. And just recently, and I don't know much about web development. I did some web development, but I'm not really an expert. And actually, even I was able to kind of build a web app easily with these open source library like Plotly, Dash, and TuckDB, and DBT, and Mage AI, and everything was Dockerized. And it's so cool, like how quickly you can actually build a proof of concept yourself as a one-man army, basically. So DBT is really like a Swiss knife of I guess data engineering. Also because it's just so versatile. You can easily deploy that across different data warehouses, different vendors. You can use any data modeling schema you want. DBT takes care of the dependencies between your stages, between your tables. It creates a DAG representation, like we know from Airflow. That's how tasks are scheduled and orchestrated. And like in my experience, DBT is really well suited to just treat it as any other software engineering product. So we have to run integration tests or smoke tests, right?
Yep.
So that means just purely testing the functionality of the code, right? Unit testing. We can do so unit testing macros basically, but we can do like good data testing with DBT. There's some libraries that can even go beyond that, beyond the basic functionality, like Great Expectations, and there's some other cool libraries like Soda for data monitoring, like checking anomalies in your data. Another cool open source tool that integrates with DBT nicely, and also something that we're looking at to implement. So it's really a nice tool to work with.
Yeah.
And in my experience, you can really build all sorts of tests with it, and just something that wasn't that easy to do when you were running stored procedures before. So
no, indeed. And what I have to say is I've noticed this interesting shift in the market. Well, many analytical tools we're building towards a public of it's very quick to teach this and it's very quick to get started and make your first dashboard or first table or whatever it is. I think DBT is setting up a precedent of like, yeah, that's cool, but this tool is very easy to maintain in the long term. It has a very robust command line utility. It has things that you can add in different languages. You can create packages. And the effect of that is that what you're mentioning, all sorts of software engineering best practices that, sure, it might feel like extra overhead, but ultimately it's great for maintainability, are things that you can very easily add. And me personally, I can say, I really wish that more tools would adopt this mentality at least.
exactly. If you look even at Airbyte, I was surprised that they was recently. I just looked at it for the first time because I'm not that fan of managed solutions. I like tools that you can really work with and that are just easy to deploy. And then found out that they just like version control for all of your pipelines, and sometimes you need to write your own adapters, connectors for things. So with DBT, it's it's a surprise that it was able to kind of really become the number one data transformation tool actually in the space. And I'm happy that I was like kind of early on in this development. So I have a bit of experience of deploying it and knowing what works and what doesn't work with DBT. So that is, I think, if I also look at the way that we have that I have actually deployed at the clients, I became more better and better at seeing what sort of testing works well and what takes a lot of time and what just doesn't work at all. For example, it's always this trade-off between should you write like non-repeatable dry code, or should you make it like very apparent, like more functional programming, and that's like this this big trade-off. And with DBT, you can do both. I mean, you can go crazy with YAML and CSV files for your some of your configs, right? To basically parse your data, like maybe. And now there's also macros that do this really easily, like DBT checkpoint, which can generate model properties for you. If you forget them, you can put it in a pre-commit. So, which is really like a time saver instead of writing all of these config files. So it's super interesting to see how a lot of this can just be automated.
Yeah.
And
I have to say, it does still happen that sometimes people see some crazy change inside of a macro and they freak out.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, this is a good idea because otherwise it's like 20 lines of SQL. So you sometimes still have that trade-off, but yeah, I fully agree with you.
Yeah.
Jovan, maybe let's go one step back. I'm very curious about your thoughts. What would you say when you look at a DBT project that you say like, wow, these people really took good care of the deployment process? What would you say is a good deployment for you?
Thinking first of all conceptually about speed of development, this trade-off of speed of development versus like adhering to certain best practices and bespoke requirements that you have within the company or within your development team. So maybe you're kind of like tied to certain security, data security, like object level security or row level security, or certain users cannot see all of the data, right? Or maybe you're tied to like really making sure that that the data you're reporting is of the best quality, right? So I guess that is kind of what I mentioned, this trade-off between, do you want your developers to ship code fast? Are you running against some time constraints, some deadlines, maybe because of industry reasons or whatever, or it's or you really want your developers to just adhere to certain best practices. If you base a lot of value on data security, on the robustness of your data, basically, and the accurateness of the accuracy of your data. So
it's really about finding that balance. And
exactly.
maybe what a lot of people might not know is it's also possible that too much of best practices becomes a bad thing.
Yep.
I've been in companies where you always needed like triple approval for some changes, and then somebody went on holidays and the whole team was stuck because of so many review processes that they had. And they were outstanding at DevOps, but I really think that really made it much, much lower than what it had to be. So it's really, we're talking about a balance rather than fully going to one of the two sides.
Exactly, and it all depends on the amount of data that you have to kind of, I guess, make available to your audience. Having said that, so yeah, it's the first thing that you should look at, right? And the second thing is how quickly can you onboard new users, new developers, right? So it ties into the first point is, if you have a lot of, let's say, best practices in place and you enforce them, well, it it may be more difficult to onboard new users, but maybe that's the price you want to pay to just have some sort of good security and best practices in place to prevent faulty data and have to ensure some level of accuracy down the line. That's what I noticed also currently at my employer is because it's a crypto broker. It's still this startup feeling, so we still have to kind of move fast, much faster than other companies, but still accuracy is a big thing. Accuracy of reporting data, the speed
For sure.
of reporting data, right? So it needs to be accurate and it needs to be really fast. And I think those two things are difficult to kind of get right at the same time. It's almost like a trade-off, right? So, and what I've noticed with good DBT deployments is just making proper use, I guess, of CI/CD, which is often overlooked, believe it or not. And I mean, introducing these software engineering best practices and that come with DBT actually. So just compiling your code in a pre-commit is already a good practice, parsing your code, and just this sort of check can already give you a sense of compute times, run times, and if your code runs as it should be, and linting code as well,
Yes.
which is very important for kind of maintainability down the line, right? Just to provide certain structure, formatting. So ultimately, with the pre-commit hooks, you kind of essentially enforce certain style behavior or just basic functionality of the code that just compiles and runs. I think that's the whole purpose of it. You can do some other style checks, like if you have a properties file for every model or source, if you have descriptions, and if you have all the columns listed, these sort of maybe less important checks you can also do.
For sure. From
towards this
naming conventions
towards
to
this goal exactly of of creating a robust data product. And then you look at CI/CD, and well, CI/CD in traditional software engineering is like where most of the unit testing and eventually deployment happens, right? So we're currently working on this CI/CD pipeline to basically test the code. We still have to think of proper unit testing. That's always this thing of what do I want my code to do eventually, and testing the inputs and outputs. And with CI/CD, you're mostly testing really kind of functionality, right? The first thing was more style and basic functionality. This is really, like making it future-proof, basically, and making sure that if you have certain anomalies, how is it dealt with within the code, basically? What sort of output can I expect, and testing on this. And this also includes like support for minimizing compute times, right? With Slim CI/CD, for example. What we currently looking at is using AWS S3 buckets to output the manifest, the JSON file from DBT, which actually contains basically
all sorts
the
of
whole
information
schema
about
of
deployments.
exactly. So basically information about your DBT models. It's this long JSON string, which you can parse eventually, right? So the idea is that in your CI/CD, you take this manifest JSON from your storage, and then you do like state comparison. So it's called state deferral, where you defer to a previous state, or basically your production job, right? That's something that you can either output through DBT Cloud through a production job, or you can actually save it in let's say the CD part of your pipeline where you actually deploy it. You can then also deploy your manifest JSON to storage. And the idea is that you just run the modified models, including their downstream dependencies. So this is very useful, especially at my previous client, where previous store procedures, you would have to kind of rerun a lot of different notebooks in Databricks even, which was really difficult to debug, because you had to check which one was run, the dependencies between them as well. So again, it doesn't provide this out-of-the-box Databricks, right?
For sure.
We did orchestration there also, and we had these notebooks, so we had no insight into the lineage when a model was
So-
last run, and this is really much more apparent with DBT. So
So before we talk about orchestration, which is interesting, I think for everybody listening, there are a lot of levels when it comes to CI/CD. In its most basic form, you should be running an automated DBT build and do not
Yep.
like merge any code if it's not building.
exactly,
However, that's really the beginning of it. You can use what Jovan mentioned, state deferrals, to only build the things that changed. Or you can even go like a lot of levels beyond and then use the manifesto.json to only build if these characteristics are made, if these files are filled out, are correct, if these naming conventions are being followed, and even if the models have exactly the same values for these same queries and all sorts of things. Really, the limit is a little bit your creativity and your engineering skills.
exactly. Like you've put it in a nice way, and um, going back to that point I made, this trade-off between speed of development and let's say some custom best practices that you have within the company. Ultimately, keep this trade-off in mind, because CI/CD can become a burden if you do too much fancy stuff. But it's the bare minimum to have a CI/CD pipeline in place. And then also, like, how do you decide what to put in a pre-commit hook, right? A hook that runs before actually you make a commit. Or you don't want to also slow down development work there, because you can frustrate the developers. So it's really a trade-off, and I basically do some DBT checkpoint. You can choose many different hooks. It's very useful, and the ones that I like is just to check for just to compile the code, because it's a very fast command, depending of course on how much. If you use like seed files or some configuration files and a lot of Jinja, this might take a long time.
If you forget to close a Jinja or even like a coma or something, compile is everything you need to find out that you messed up.
Exactly, and then you can check, if you properly make use of the ref function, right, to reference your models and sources. If every model has a properties file, which is very important, and you just flag it, right? So you can actually output if a model doesn't have a YAML entry.
Yep.
And it also has a hook to generate these models in a schema file if it doesn't exist. So it just fetches basically the metadata, the schema of your models, which is, I guess, the basics. And of course, we use SQL Fluff as a very custom formatter. You can use SQL format as well, which works great with
more opinionated.
It's
no
more
need
opinionated.
to argue
exactly.
how exactly the SQL of the company should look like.
Exactly. So we use a basic template for now, and with SQL format, it's also cool. Like, it's just one template, but because we will distribute this to other teams, we also want to provide a bit of freedom for them to decide on what works best for them. And SQL Fluff is really great for this. And with DBT Power User, which is a cool extension, I would recommend people to install if they use Visual Studio Code. It's very useful. Provides you kind of lineage out of the box, which is one of the main reasons why someone would maybe opt for DBT Cloud, apart from orchestration, that it has this documentation and lineage of your DBT project in there. Or Power User also has this lineage of your models. It provides a panel basically with you can easily just click on models and just quickly switch to different models. It's even my experience is that it's even better than using DBT Cloud, and you can easily write documentation as well with it, easily just generated. I believe even if you can use their API actually to I guess it just calls OpenAI or AI's GPT 3.5.
I've seen it, but I don't know exactly how it works.
I think so, and yeah, you can generate documentation. So it's very easy to. It just provides this very easy development workflow.
Yes, and you can also preview your data, which
Exactly.
is
Yep.
one of the coolest things of DBT Cloud as well. You can do it locally.
You can do it locally, indeed. Yeah. And yeah, that's kind of what we do in the pre-commit is basically just formatting checks and basic functionality. Again, CI/CD is to do more unit testing, like building the code, actually, like running the code and doing the data tests. Because you might actually have introduced some sort of bad code that actually duplicates data, that maybe a Cartesian join that slows down your compute. You can easily check this in the CI/CD, and it's I think this gateway, right? So that is the main benefit of DBT as a more, I would say, as a more of a software product rather
For
than
sure.
pure data pipeline product.
No, for sure. What I've always said is when a value is not correct, it's either because the assumptions of the data or data quality issues are present, or because you, while you were doing your SQL work, you introduced some sort of bug or error or mistake. The first one, it's fine. It's a little bit unavoidable and it's frustrating. But if you're doing things well as a data team and if you really care about deployment, you should be fairly confident that the second thing I mentioned is never happening, that those errors are never introduced by you, your work, and your team. That's really what it boils to.
Exactly, and like I said, DBT is very versatile. So we just have this mono repo that we use for analytics and for orchestration, where we have Astronomer, right? So we manage their flow. We just spin up Astronomer, and we just have our DAGs there, right? And especially with Cosmos now, we can actually have just one DAG basically for our DBT. You don't have to use the bash operator anymore, and you can. It just basically kind of natively just makes the resolves the dependencies and builds a DAG for you basically of all of these tasks. So the dependency of DBT models, right? The DAG of DBT is parsed, and then that's how basically we leverage Cosmos to build this Airflow DAG for us, which every task represents a DBT node, a model, or a source. And that's very useful because when we deploy this to other teams, the only thing they need to do is Docker build and run and spin it up, and then Astro dev start, run basically, and then with Docker file and a dev container config, we can actually make it very easily to just get started ingesting your own data, transforming the data with DBT, and deploying it with the CI/CD pipeline that comes with it. So we have made it very very user friendly.
For sure, a common setup that you see a lot is some sort of data engineer handles the orchestration part.
Yep.
And then it's up to you, the person building in DBT, to just work with Docker containers. And the moment that you're done working, everything gets deployed, properly orchestrated, and you don't have to worry too much about it.
Exactly, and we just provide all of these tools like the Python's like the black formatter for Python, SQL Fluff for SQL, the DBT Power User extension inside the dev container, and people just have to open the Docker, the extension in VS Code and get started. It's really that simple.
Yes, and it's amazing when everybody's exactly on the same version of everything, including Python, because that sometimes causes some problems.
Exactly. So it works like a charm, to be honest. And we just natively have these tests in place, so we can also ensure some basic adherence to some checks that we have on our side when it comes to testing and deploying code. And it's interesting to see that what I did previously at clients at Xebia as a consultant. I'm currently doing now as well, but also like rolling out data orchestration capability with Astronomer and Airflow inside one repo. So it's really enabling business users and analysts to basically get started with self-service analytics, right? That's what it's all about.
For sure. Jovan, we're almost running out of time, but I'm very curious for the people listening. What are some quick tips that you would give them to improve their deployment? I'm not going to say today, but this week, some quick wins that they can do.
Sure. So, like I mentioned, work with pre-commit hooks. That's really, really useful. It's just to do some quick checks on basically like does your code compile, and then, I mean, not everyone is in a position to maybe also work with like managed Git servers, right? So GitLab or GitHub or whatever, Bitbucket, or Azure DevOps. So because you might not have the permission to basically set up pipelines and configure like secrets and everything. So, but just pre-commit already helps a lot, I think, in my opinion. That's just a quick win. Well, also have a look at, if you're already using Airflow and Astronomer, have a look at Cosmos, because it just makes it so easier to just, you can just have one DAG for basically your whole DBT build command, just build your whole project. And then you can have like one DAG for just the full refresh. And another one if you just want to do testing. So it's just one DAG, and Cosmos handles the whole dependency between models, which is super useful. Because still you always left with this question, how do I actually then orchestrate my DBT models effectively in Airflow? That used to be like an art on its own as well. Like there was a lot of hidden complexity there as well. So with Cosmos, that is kind of taken out of the equation, which is...
they abstract quite a lot.
They abstracted, yeah. So, and I would also say, like, just have proper documentation in place, like the hooks that generate the properties for your models. You can do that easily. You can automate that nowadays. I guess I guess data engineers such as software engineers are not. We're not always keen on writing documentation. No one likes writing documentation, but I think of course it's essential. And I think with the hooks techniques that I mentioned, it's really straightforward to build documentation alongside developing your code. So like write as you code basically. So
yeah.
I
mean, you can also throw the responsibility of documenting to whoever asked you to build the table in the first place. Exactly, I really like this of using documentation as requirements.
Yeah.
That also eases up the burden. But yeah, sure, you also have LLMs and other things to remove some of the manual work.
Exactly. And then, of course, it rarely happens that all of your data pipelines are in basically written in SQL or in stored procedures. Some of them might be, I don't know, like I encountered Databricks notebooks running PySpark code or Scala code. So, of course, nowadays it's very easy to run Python in DBT as well, and to just do API calls basically for ingestion and then transform that data, all of in the context of DBT. So I guess also look at that particular case where you can just leverage what you already have in Python and just use DBT to orchestrate it and to just have basically everything in one place. That is, I think, the beauty of DBT.
Yeah, one-stop shop for everything transformation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. Jovan, it was an absolute pleasure to have you here, hear more about your thoughts about DBT. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.